I've known Tori Hitchcock since 2017. That year, when she was a performer at Busch Gardens, we did a photo shoot in April and another one later in August. The pictures from those shoots are some of my all-time favorites. Since then, she has performed on cruise ships and has spent the last few years teaching. I was happy to hear she was returning to Busch for the Halloween and Christmas seasons, and we did another photo shoot together in October. She recently let me know she was trying to get a good shot of a particular moment in her current show, Monster Stomp. She had only been successful in grabbing a screenshot from some cell phone video. Here's a little video clip of that moment from my show video.
Flip your wings and fly to Daddy. Take a dive and swim to Daddy.
I thought it was a great opportunity to use the Sony A9 III to go after a specific shot in a show. For my first attempt to get this shot, I had my camera set to shoot at 30 frames per second, and I held down the shutter for about a second and a half, which gave me 45 images right around that time in the show. I can show you what those look like by going to here. The sequence starts with her just about to make the kick. So her leg comes up, and then she does the layback, and then starts to come back up again. So the shot here that would be the best one, I would think is probably, I'm looking at her hair, which is probably this one. And that's also just about the peak of her kick on her leg. I would probably pick this picture, except that it's got these tombstones right in the way, blocking. So I ended up coming back and shooting another show and moved my seating position so that I had a better view. So those pictures, again, I got 42 pictures, held down the shutter for just over a second, almost a second and a half. And the framing on these ones looks like this, which is much better. And when I started, she was already on her way up. So leg comes up. She does the layback and then comes back up again. So we want to pick the best of these pictures. And the question is, where is the best? So we can see her leg is up. And as she's coming down, the leg starts to come down. Maybe right around here or here is the better. Looking at the hair again. Maybe that one. That's probably the picture we want to go with. So I'm going to mark that 5 stars. And when I click here, that's the picture that I chose. And then I'm going to go ahead and edit this and show you all what it looks like to edit a show picture. So the way that I start doing that is by double clicking on it. And it opens up in the darkroom section. And the first thing I'm going to do is go to my sigmoid module and switch over to the smooth setting and see if that changes anything. In this case, it doesn't make it any better. I have had other pictures when I'm shooting show pictures that doing that makes it better if there are overblown highlights. So for instance, this area of this roof right here, see how that's blown out blue with that light? If I switch over to smooth, it sort of dims down that blown out look. But this time, I don't think it's going to be necessary. So we're going to leave this alone. The first thing I'm going to do is get a crop and get the picture straightened. So let's say that horizontal, if I hold down my right mouse button and drag, that sets the horizon. And now I can crop this so that we've got a good picture. With show pictures like this, I tend to do these freehand. So now that I'm looking at this, I think it's tilted just a little bit to the right. So I'm going to click back to here and roll this back. That looks a little bit more level to me. Then I'm going to crop and do a freehand crop. And I'm going to drag this corner right over here so that it kind of keeps this stage cutout so that they're framed. And then on this side, I'm going to drag it over and get rid of the back side of that performer and pull this over. Maybe let's try in the center of that tombstone, and then pull down the top right around there. And let's see what that looks like. That's a pretty decent crop. Yeah, that's not too bad. Let's pull this over here, the right-hand side, over a little closer, sort of so that it's closer to the edge of this building. That puts them right in the middle of the frame, which I usually don't like people like right dead set in the middle of the frame unless there's some sort of a symmetry going on. But it's okay in this particular case. This part of the picture over here really doesn't matter that much to the picture. Let's see what it looks like if I pull this over even further like this. No, that doesn't look right. We're going to keep this. We're going to keep that over there. That looks better. Okay, now that we have a crop, let's work on getting the exposure correct. And the first thing we're going to do with that is just go to this exposure tab. There are a couple different ways to do this. One is just with the exposure tab. This will bring up everything in the picture. So I'm using my scroll wheel to lift this up. And what I don't want to have happen is for these bright parts of the picture to get blown out. You can see that towards the right-hand side of this histogram, as I roll this up, the colors, other than red right now is just blown out. And there's nothing I can do about that. But I could roll this up to the right. And you can see this is sort of starting to get washed out. I don't want this to blow out. So let's move it up to about there. Okay. That looks pretty good. Now, let's bring up the midtones in this picture. And the way that I'm going to do that is I am going to... Actually, let's try bringing up the darks. So what I'm going to do is bring in the tone equalizer module. And if I go over here and I hover over this part of the picture and I use my scroll wheel and roll it up, you can see how the dark side of this curve starts to go up, and it's lifting up the darks in the picture without doing much about the rest of it. I don't want to do that because that's bringing up the blacks, so I'm going to reset that again. Maybe what we'll do is we'll grab out in this part of the picture and lift it up and see what that does. That looks pretty nice. Let's pull up just a little bit more up here. That looks good too. So we're getting up into the midtones in this case, without blowing out the highlights. There is another way to do this, and I'll show you how to do that. If I use this RGB levels tool, this is the point of the mid-tones of the pictures. This is the the brightest side, and this is the dark side. If I grab this mid-tones curve and I slide it to the left, it brings up the mid-tones without changing the darks or the brights. But when it does that, it pops the saturation up as well. In this case, when I've done that, it's kind of brought up these blacks, and I don't really want to do that. So let's not use that tool. Let's go back to the tone equalizer and use it to bring up the mids instead. Like that. And that has kept the darks dark, which is really what I want. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Let me go back and reset that. Bring this up to about there. That looks pretty decent. That's even better. Okay. Now when I close this tool, it kind of locks that in place. And now I'm going to show you something. I'm going to zoom in on these dark areas, especially over in here. See how you get all of this speckling. This is digital noise. And you get rid of that, first of all, by using the DeNoise module in Darktable. And I'm going to click on this button that gives it the default settings. When I do that, it gets rid of the color noise that was there. And you'll see that, if I'm going to zoom in here real tight, you'll see that color noise come back if I turn it off. See how it's all speckly? And that gets rid of that. But it still has a lot of grain in it. There is another setting that I've set up in here, a preset. If I click on this one, in that case, it didn't help. It actually made things worse. So I'm going to go back to the default. There. And so when we're zoomed out, you can't really see that noise, but when you zoom in tight, you can. And that's just a function of the sensor that I'm using in the camera and the amount of light that's in the scene. In this case, this part of the stage was very dimly lit, and there was a spotlight over on the right-hand side. So this is not too bad. Another thing that I can do here is I'm going to switch over to this module, and I'm going to give it some local contrast and see if that improves the look of the picture. In this case, I'm not sure. I mean, it makes it pop a bit. What it does is it really kind of makes the highlights hotter. I don't know if I want that. I can pull the highlights back down by grabbing this slider and pulling it like this to keep it from blowing out quite so high. So if I put this at around 50%, now when I turn this button on and off, the highlights on, like right on her arm, stay at the same brightness, but you do get a little bit more contrast in the rest of the picture. So let's see if I zoom out. I'm going to turn this on and off and see if it helps. I think it does. It pulls some of these blacks down a little bit blacker, especially over in this door. Just makes it pop a little bit more. I can tweak this by changing the amount of detail. And what I have found is about there's a preset here for 108, and that's about the minimum amount of setting that I get that still gives you a decent effect. So I'm going to pull these highlights back down to 50%. There. Now if I turn this on and off, you can see it just gives just a little bit of a pop. I kind of like that better than when it was up at 115. It was more like here. So let's stick with that. And there is our picture. I think that looks pretty decent. So I'm going to come back to Light Table and export it out. Now I'm going to shrink that software down, come over here and run Topaz DeNoise AI, which is this wonderful little tool that helps me get rid of noise. Now I'm going to open up my Windows Explorer, grab that picture that I just made and drag it over to here. And now I can see the difference between the image as it started and then once it's been processed by this software. And to see the difference, let's go back up in this area of the door again and zoom in tight. And this is what it looks like. And when I let go, it shows you the processed image. So it really does make a difference in these areas of the picture. It smooths out some of that digital noise. Doesn't get rid of it entirely, but it just helps. And that's because I have already set up the settings over here to be very minimalistic in its processing. Because when it does digital noise processing, you lose detail in some of these areas. So if I drag this up like this and we look at like the lace in her skirt, when I let go, it loses some of the detail, just a little bit. But boy, it makes a huge difference in the shadow of her skirt. That's what it looks like when it's original, and when I let it process, it gets rid of that noise. Let's look at over and near her face. So same thing. When I'm moving the picture around, it shows the original version. Look at the edge of her hair, and it smooths that out a bit. It even smooths out some of the the grain in her hair without really losing the detail. So that's one of the reasons why I really do like this tool. It does a great job, especially in backgrounds and big empty areas, of getting rid of noise. You can really see that over here on this piece. You can see the difference between the original image and what it looks like when it's processed. So now I will save this image, and it'll save it in the same directory with a -NR for noise reduced on the end of it. And now I can close that, and we can look at the difference between the original image and the noise reduced image. And at this resolution, you really can't tell much of a difference. But if I was to hit F for full resolution, you can see in this area, and if I go to the previous file, yeah, so look at the noise up in this area, and then when I go to the noise reduced version, it cleans that up. Doesn't get rid of it entirely, but it just reduces it and makes it so that it's not bothersome. Now, none of that really matters when I upload this and people are looking at it on their cell phones, but I know that the image is the best that it can be if I'm sharing this with someone, and you never know what might happen to this someday in the future. It could end up being printed big somewhere. I can only hope. So there is the picture that I'm going to give to Tori, and hopefully she will like that.